A spoon scrapes the bottom of a bowl of mush. Steam rises from a cup that smells roasted but may contain very little coffee, while yesterday's bread softens in the small amount of milk warming on the stove. In many Great Depression homes, breakfast was kept small on purpose. Every spoonful of flour, every stick of fuel, and every leftover used in the morning could determine whether a fuller meal reached the table that night. And at the end of this list, a photograph from 1939 will show what happened when even that strategy was no longer enough. There was no single Great Depression breakfast. The table changed between city and countryside, north and south, black and white households, immigrants, sharecroppers, unemployed workers, and farmers who could grow food without earning enough cash from it. What connected many of those homes was the need to begin the day by spending as little as possible. Food prices fell during the early years of the crisis, but lower prices did not create abundance. Without wages, even cheaper food could remain out of reach. The Bureau of Labor Statistics found that retail food prices reached a deep low in March 1933. At the same moment, millions of households had lost purchasing power. In 1936, the USDA's Bureau of Home Economics published diets to fit the family income. It offered 4 levels of food planning, including an adequate minimum cost plan and a restricted diet for emergency use. Cereals, bread, milk when available, cornmeal, molasses, potatoes, and modest amounts of fat appeared not as nostalgia, but as household arithmetic. Fuel belonged in that arithmetic. USDA instructions for the fireless cooker, an insulated box that held heat, explained that dinner could be started in the morning and continue cooking after the stove fire went out. That detail exposes the central thread of this episode. Breakfast and dinner were not separate decisions. A fire lit in the morning might need to work for both meals. The evidence does not say every family deliberately reduced breakfast to save dinner. No national survey supports a claim that broad. But low-cost menus, leftover practices, fuel-saving instructions, and Farm Security Administration photographs repeatedly reveal the same household logic. Use less now to preserve something for later. And that logic began before the first bite, inside a cup that could promise coffee without delivering coffee in full. Before we lift that cup, subscribe and stay with the investigation through number 1. This first item looks like nothing more than a cheap drink, but it reveals how a family tried to preserve normal life before it could preserve food. Number 10. The coffee that wasn't always only coffee. Dark steam rises from an enamel cup, but the aroma carries an earthy edge. Is it coffee, chicory, roasted grain, or a mixture of all three? During hard times, Americans could draw on an older practice of stretching or replacing coffee with roasted ingredients. This is where documentation and memory must be separated. Advertisements in the 1925 Tea and Coffee Trade Journal, 4 years before the crash, show American chicory suppliers and even a business called American Cereal Coffee. That proves such products circulated in the United States. It does not prove that every poor household used them during the 1930s. Regional tradition and family memory, particularly in the South, complete part of the picture, but they vary. The human meaning lived in the ritual. An adult poured a hot drink into the same familiar cup even when the mixture no longer tasted the same. The morning kept its shape. For a few minutes, shortage could look like nothing more than a different recipe. Chicory remains part of regional American coffee culture, and roasted grain drinks are still sold as alternatives. What can be a matter of taste or lifestyle today could once be a way to stretch an expensive ingredient without announcing scarcity at the table. But a hot cup could not carry a person through hours of work. For that, kitchens turned to a food that thickened with water, filled a bowl, and could return in a new form the following day. Number 9. Cornmeal mush that returned to the skillet. A spoon cuts through thick yellow mush as steam fogs the edge of the bowl. Cornmeal mush required little more than meal, water, and salt. Milk, molasses, or fat could change the flavor when they were available, but the basic formula remained inexpensive and dependable. In 1936, the USDA included cornmeal in food plans designed for limited incomes. The overlooked detail is that the bulletin did not offer only one healthy diet. It separated an adequate minimum cost plan from a restricted emergency diet. The federal document acknowledged that some families live below even the budget considered nutritionally adequate. The dish changed meaning when a little remained in the pot. The cook could let it set, slice it later, and brown it with whatever fat was available. This was more than reusing cornmeal. It was an attempt to make one pot create more than one moment of fullness. Grits, fried polenta, and other corn dishes now appear as regional favorites or restaurant food. Yet the technique of cooking once and transforming the remainder is still familiar to households managing time, energy, and money. Cornmeal had a limit. It demanded attention over the fire. The next grain could cook slowly, and an almost forgotten device allowed the heat from breakfast to begin preparing dinner. Number 8. Oatmeal and the box that held heat. How much fire was hidden inside a bowl of oatmeal? On a wood or coal-burning stove, that was not a metaphor. Long-cooking cereal required heat, water, and time. 3 resources a household without steady income had to manage carefully. Before the Depression, USDA bulletins had promoted the fireless cooker. A pot was brought to temperature, sealed inside an insulated box, and allowed to continue cooking with retained heat. A 1919 bulletin stated that dinner could be started early and the stove fire then allowed to go out. The device was not invented in the 1930s, but its logic mattered when fuel economy became urgent. The most human part was the quiet planning. The person making oatmeal was not thinking only about that morning. She or he used the lit stove, calculated the next pot, and tried to move dinner forward before the family left to seek work, manage the household, or face another day in the fields. Slow cookers and overnight oats preserve the same basic idea today. Move labor to another time and let time do part of the work. Modern convenience often saves effort. In that kitchen, the goal could be saving the fuel that still had to warm the night. And when the cereal ran out, one ingredient remained even more vulnerable: bread. First, it would be softened. Then it would be forced back onto the table after its freshness was gone. If the connection between morning oatmeal and dinner cooking on the same fire changed how you see a Depression kitchen, subscribe. Forgotten Meals follows clues this small because an insulated wooden box can sometimes explain survival more clearly than a political speech. Number 7. Milk toast. Bread softened in warm milk. Bread sinks into a bowl and loses its hardness in warm milk. Milk toast was an established American preparation before the Great Depression, often associated with simple meals and food for someone who was ill. In a strained household, the same combination could turn a dry slice into something warm and shareable. The record requires caution. Earlier cookbooks document the dish, and the USDA's 1936 low-cost food plans include bread, toast, and milk among possible foods. But the government never defined milk toast as a national depression ration. It survives in many family memories, yet its exact frequency cannot be measured. Here, the meal becomes a relationship. Someone chose to warm the limited milk and offer it to a child, an older relative, or whoever needed it most. The scarce ingredient mattered less as a recipe than as a decision about who would receive the bowl. Bread in milk, bread soups, and softened toast remain comfort foods in several traditions. The comforting memory can conceal the original reason for that softness, making aging bread edible and turning a small amount of milk into the feeling of a meal. When there was no milk, the bread did not disappear. It hardened on the shelf, and the kitchen had to create a second life without adding almost anything. Number 6. Yesterday's bread made to look new. A hard slice cracks under the knife before it reaches the griddle. It might receive water, a little milk, fat, gravy, or only heat. There was no national recipe for stale bread. There were countless household decisions designed to keep it from becoming waste. Between 1933 and 1935, the Bureau of Labor Statistics expanded the foods tracked in its retail price reports. The added items included whole wheat bread, soda crackers, molasses, hominy grits, and salt pork. It is a revealing bureaucratic detail. The government needed a clearer picture of the modest foods shaping real household budgets. What transformed the slice was the effort not to present it as failure. The cook could toast it, crumble it, soak it, or cover it, so the family received another dish, not simply a rejected leftover. A change in name and texture could protect dignity as well as food. French toast, bread pudding, croutons, and food waste recipes still convert old bread into something desirable. Today, that technique is often celebrated as culinary creativity. During the 1930s, for many families, creativity and necessity occupied the same skillet. Some kitchens still had a little new flour and fat. There, breakfast bread could be baked as biscuits, and a nearly empty pan could produce the gravy that made everyone believe there was more. Number 5. Biscuits with pan gravy adjusted. A nearly empty skillet hisses when flour meets the final trace of fat. Water or milk enters slowly, the liquid thickens, and the gravy covers split biscuits. A small amount of fat has now reached every plate. Biscuits and gravy have regional roots that predate the Depression, particularly in the South and Appalachia. Federal low-cost food plans list compatible ingredients: flour, milk when available, and limited salt pork. But that does not make the dish an official relief ration. It was household and regional food, not a uniform federal menu. Nobody said out loud when the skillet was nearly empty. The cook simply scraped a little slower, spreading the gravy evenly across every plate, without revealing that faint trace of fat was all that remained until dinner. The dish remains on diner menus, restaurant breakfast boards, and family tables. Its survival shows how an extending technique can become regional identity long after the economic emergency that strengthened it disappears from view. But flour and fat were still new ingredients. When a household could not spend either one in the morning, breakfast began with food already cooked the night before, cold, firm, and waiting for a second browned surface. Do milk toast, stale bread, or biscuits and gravy appear in your family story? Tell us in the comments what your grandparents called the meal and the state or region where they served it. Family memory is not a substitute for documentation, but it can tell an investigation where to look next. Number 4. The potatoes that escaped dinner. Cold potatoes from the night before hit the skillet with onion, if there is any. Mashed, sliced, or simply reheated, they could become breakfast without requiring a new base of flour, meat, or cereal. The 1936 bulletin, Diets to Fit the Family Income, already cited earlier in this episode, treated the potato differently from most other vegetables. It appeared among the recommended foods across nearly every diet level in the document, from the most comfortable to the most restricted emergency plan. That is not a coincidence of menu planning. It is official recognition that the potato, because it stored well and cost little, was the one vegetable almost no family, however poor, could afford to leave out. The human turn begins when someone intentionally leaves part of dinner in the pot. The leftover is no longer an accident. It becomes a plan. Serving it at breakfast means the previous night's meal had also been divided with the following day. Home fries and breakfast hash still fill American menus, now often surrounded by eggs and meat. Today's abundant version can hide the original household logic. Use a hot surface to create new texture in ingredients that could not be discarded. Potatoes were not available in every home or season. A concentrated sweetener could make corn easier to face once again, but even the way it was poured revealed who would receive a little more. Number 3. Cornbread, molasses, and the last shine of fat. A dark thread of molasses crosses a dry piece of cornbread. At another table, there is no molasses. Only a thin coat of dripping saved from the last meat cooked in the pan. The flavor was small, but it changed the feeling of eating corn again. Oral tradition across the South preserved a distinction rarely found in official records. Molasses was called long sweetenin' because it poured out in a slow, continuous stream, while granulated sugar, more expensive and harder to keep in the pantry, was short sweetenin'. The phrase comes from no government survey. It comes from the language families themselves used to describe what could or could not reach the table. The food acquired a different weight at the moment of distribution. The hand holding the spoon decided whether a child's piece received the center of the molasses stream, whether the fat would be divided among everyone, or whether some must remain for dinner gravy. Serving became budgeting in public. Cornbread, grits, molasses, and cured meat flavors remain recognizable in Southern food. Their present-day meaning is not only culinary. Foods associated with regional identity still carry unequal histories of land, income, and access that a menu alone cannot explain. Then came a morning no household cook could solve alone. Children reached school without eating, and the federal response that feels obvious today did not yet exist. Number 2, the school breakfast that did not yet exist. The school bell rings, chairs scrape, and a child opens a book on an empty stomach. During the 1930s, communities, charities, and schools organized child feeding in different places, while donated commodity efforts helped build lunch services. But there was no permanent federal school breakfast program. The dates create the discovery. The National School Lunch Act established the National Lunch Program in 1946. The school breakfast program began as a pilot in 1966 and became permanent in 1975. Placing today's federal breakfast program inside the New Deal would move the policy backward by 3 decades. The human turn is the absence itself. Teachers, staff members, neighbors, and parents could recognize hunger. But recognition did not guarantee money, a kitchen, or food in the morning. A child depended on what home had managed to preserve, or on local solutions that never reached everyone. Today, the school breakfast program is public infrastructure in American schools. Its existence reflects an eventual recognition that hunger is a barrier to learning, although participation and access still differ from one community to another. Before number 1, we have to look at families who did not even have a stable kitchen in which to save fuel, store bread, or plan dinner. In July 1939, Russell Lee carried his camera into a camp beneath a bridge in Oklahoma City. Subscribe before the final photograph. The next block does not need an invented name, an invented menu, or an invented quotation. The official caption already records a family eating breakfast, and what it does not record is part of the story. Number 1. Breakfast under the bridge. Beneath a bridge, daylight enters through gaps in a makeshift shelter. A family gathers around simple containers. In July 1939, photographer Russell Lee recorded the scene at Mays Avenue Camp in Oklahoma City for the Farm Security Administration. The individual caption says only, "Family eating breakfast." It does not identify the food. The larger group of 112 photographs supplies the context. Shacks and tents near the city dump, water drawn from shallow wells or purchased from a vendor, and families recovering discarded food from vegetable businesses, packing houses, and other institutions. The catalog also warns that some group-level data came from an old, unverified card. The record must be read carefully, not embellished. That silence is where breakfast stops being a list of ingredients. We do not know the menu, but we know the family sat together. Someone gathered what was available, distributed it, and made a meal inside a place built to be temporary but inhabited as a home. The photograph reaches into the present because food insecurity is not only the total absence of food. It also means depending on discarded goods, not knowing the next meal, and spending time turning uncertainty into the appearance of routine. Food banks, school meals, and assistance programs still try to interrupt modern versions of that morning. This is number 1 because it refuses a comforting conclusion. Chicory, mush, stale bread, and gravy reveal ingenuity. Mays Avenue reveals ingenuity's limit. When income, housing, water, and access fail at the same time, no household recipe can substitute for public policy. These breakfasts should not be romanticized as proof that people knew how to get by. Reusing bread or stretching a pot required skill. Having to do it every day without knowing whether the next meal was secure was deprivation. Ingenuity reduced harm. It did not remove the cause. In 1933, the federal government created the Federal Surplus Relief Corporation to distribute agricultural surpluses. It became the Food Surplus Commodities Corporation in 1935. By 1938, according to the USDA's legislative history, the system was distributing $54 million in food each year. In May 1939, the first experimental food stamp program opened in Rochester, New York. The policy carried a central contradiction of the Depression. Parts of the agricultural system held surplus while families elsewhere were hungry. The challenge was not simply to produce food. It was to connect production, income, transportation, assistance, and dignity without treating poor households as the final destination for unwanted goods. FARA, the WPA, the Resettlement Administration, and the Farm Security Administration attacked different parts of the crisis. None created the modern nutrition system alone, but their records, together with USDA research and Library of Congress photographs, helped move hunger from the territory of individual blame into public debate. The thread connecting these 10 blocks was the attempt to protect dinner. Drink something resembling coffee, cook grain with water, reuse bread, save fat, heat potatoes already cooked, and burn less fuel in the morning. The documents do not make this a universal rule. They reveal a recurring strategy and show the people who no longer had enough resources even to use it. The legacy lives in school breakfast, commodity programs, food assistance, and the belief that a child should not have to choose between learning and enduring hunger. Those institutions did not appear complete in 1933. They were built in stages, often too late for the families visible in the photographs. Breakfast saved food for dinner. At midday, however, schools and communities began turning agricultural surpluses into something else: lunch and public policy. In the next episode of Forgotten Meals, the investigation follows school meals that existed before the National School Lunch Act, and the moment feeding a child began to move from local charity toward national responsibility.